Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, listener. You're listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. On tonight's edition, we invite you to leave behind your safe reality and descend with us into the frightening depths of the most terrifying imaginations, with 2 audio adaptations of frightening fiction about cunning cats and shadowed spirits. I'm your host, Paul J. McSorley, and tonight I'll be your guide as we traverse the dimly lit corridors of your darkest dreams. I also wanted to take another moment to thank you for all of your donations. We met our goal, but still really need your help. Every continued share, donation, and comment of support helps. Let's keep building this together. A lot of listeners have inquired as to what this fundraiser is for, and I'm happy to tell you that there is a breakdown and allocation description on our GoFundMe page, helpchilling.org. Joining us tonight to help bring to life the frightening fiction of Craig Groshek and Dirk Stevens is Beth Gadow, Danielle Hewitt, Heather Thomas, myself, Paul J. McSorley, Olivia Steele, and Michelle Kane. Now get your ticket ready, take your seat in our theater of the minds, and brace yourself. It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Our first tale this evening is written by Chilling Tales for Dark Nights founder, owner, and creative mastermind Craig Groshek, and performed by Beth Gadow, Danielle Hewitt, and Heather Thomas. After bringing a stray cat named Winnie into her home, Amy's life takes a dark turn. Mysterious accidents occur, and a sense of dread builds. When Winnie returns from the dead, Amy's worst fears are realized. Now, without further ado, I present to you, Winnie.
The night was heavy with silence as Amy pulled into the driveway of her small, single-story ranch home. The glow of the streetlights barely reached the edges of her property, leaving the surrounding trees shrouded in darkness. After another grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, all she wanted was to kick off her shoes, pour herself a glass of Cabernet, and unwind. She grabbed her purse from the passenger seat, her movements slow and deliberate, the weariness of the day settling into her bones. As she stepped out of the car, the cool night air hit her, bringing with it the smell of damp earth and autumn leaves. The familiar scent should have been comforting, but tonight it only heightened the strange sense of unease that had been gnawing at her all day. Amy paused at the front door, fumbling with her keys. That's when she saw it. A small, gray cat sitting on the top step, staring up at her with unblinking yellow eyes. The cat didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched her with a calm intensity that made Amy's skin prickle. "Hey there, little one," Amy murmured, crouching down to get a better look. The cat was almost indistinguishable from the shadows, save for those piercing eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Around its neck hung a small, tarnished tag. Amy squinted, trying to make out the letters. "Winifred," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's a fancy name for a stray." The cat didn't react, only continued to watch her with an unnerving stillness. There was something odd about the way it looked up at her, something too knowing. But Amy was too tired to dwell on it. She sighed, standing back up. All right, Winifred, let's get you inside. The cat didn't hesitate. As soon as Amy opened the door, it padded in, tail held high, moving as if it had always belonged there. Amy watched bemused as the cat made a beeline for the living room and jumped onto the couch, curling up as if it owned the place. Make yourself at home, why don't you? Amy mused, closing the door behind her. She tossed her purse onto the kitchen counter and rubbed her eyes. The house felt different somehow, the air heavier, charged with a strange tension that she couldn't quite place. Pushing the thought aside, Amy decided to head out once more to pick up some essentials for her unexpected guest. The local convenience store was only a short walk away, and she figured she might as well grab a bottle of wine while she was at it. Winnie, she decided the nickname suited the cat better, barely lifted her head as Amy slipped out the door. The trip to the store was quick and uneventful, and yet she found herself glancing over her shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone, or something, following her. But each time the street behind her was empty, the shadows undisturbed. When she returned home, the house was as she'd left it, with Winnie still curled up on the couch. Amy set up a litter box in the laundry room, poured some kibble into a bowl, and placed it on the kitchen floor. Winnie didn't move, her eyes half closed, seemingly disinterested in everything around her. Amy poured herself a generous glass of Cabernet and settled into the armchair across from the couch. She took a sip, savoring the rich, velvety taste, and tried to relax. The wine helped, but only a little. Those motionless eyes were still trained on her. So, Winnie, Amy began, more to fill the silence than anything else. What's your story? Got a home somewhere, or are you just out here haunting people's porches? Winnie didn't respond, of course, but Amy could have sworn she saw a flicker of something in the cat's eyes. A glimmer of recognition, perhaps. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. It was just a cat. A stray looking for a warm place to sleep, nothing more. But as she drained the last of her wine and set the glass on the coffee table, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a terrible mistake. The morning light was thin and gray as it filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Amy stood at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee, her mind still foggy with sleep. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. She turned around, expecting to find Winnie lounging on the couch where she'd left her the night before. Instead, she found the cat perched on the kitchen counter, peering at her with those same uncanny amber eyes. Winnie, Amy sighed, setting down her coffee. You're not supposed to be up here. The cat didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stared at Amy, her gaze steady and unsettling. Amy hesitated, then reached out to gently push the cat off the counter. But the moment her hand got close, Winnie made it clear she had no intention of doing as she was told, emitting a low, menacing sound that sent a shiver down Amy's spine. All right, fine, suit yourself, Amy muttered, pulling her hand back. She grabbed her coffee and retreated to the living room. As she sat down on the couch, Winnie padded after her, jumping up beside her and kneading her claws into Amy's leg. The prick of sharp claws through her pants made Amy wince. Ouch, Winnie, easy there. But the cat didn't ease up. If anything, she pressed harder, her claws digging deeper into Amy's skin. Amy gently pushed her off, but Winnie simply hopped back up, resuming her painful kneading. Okay, that's enough, Amy said, standing up and moving to the armchair instead. This time, Winnie remained frozen in place, following Amy with her eyes. The cat eventually settled back on the couch, its fixation disturbing in its intensity. Amy tried to focus on her coffee, but she found it increasingly difficult to ignore her newfound feline companion's bizarre behavior. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 7:30 a.m. Time to get ready for work. The thought of spending another day in the chaos of the hospital wasn't exactly appealing, but it was better than sitting here, under the scrutiny of those relentless eyes. Amy stood up, setting her mug in the sink, and headed to the bedroom to change. As she passed the basement stairs, Winnie darted out from nowhere, streaking across her path and nearly tripping her. "Jesus, Winnie!" Amy yelped, catching herself on the railing just in time. Her heart raced as she looked down at the cat, who had already settled herself at the bottom of the steps, staring up at Amy with those same unsettling eyes. "Are you trying to kill me?" Amy cried, shaking her head as she continued to her room. She changed quickly, trying to push the morning's strange events out of her mind. It's just a cat, she reminded herself. Just a cat being a cat. But as she pulled on her shoes and grabbed her keys, another thought nagged at the back of her mind. What if Winnie wasn't just a cat? What if there was something more to her? Something wrong? Amy dismissed the thought as ridiculous, but the idea lingered as she walked out the door. She made it halfway to her car before she noticed the slashed tires. Her heart sank. The rubber had been shredded, deep gashes running along the sides of all 4 tires. There was no way she was driving anywhere today. "Damn it," Amy whispered, looking around as if expecting to see the culprit standing nearby. But the street was empty, the surroundings silent. It was too early for anyone to be up and about, except for maybe a jogger or two. She pulled out her phone and dialed the hospital, explaining the situation and telling them she wouldn't be able to make it in. It wasn't an ideal situation. She hated calling in, but there was no other option. The hospital assured her they'd cover her shift, but Amy could hear the frustration in the nurse manager's voice. With a sigh, Amy hung up and turned back to the house. Winnie was sitting by the door staring at her. "Did you do this?" Amy asked, half joking. But even as she said it, a chill ran down her spine. Winnie didn't respond, of course. She just sat there, as if daring Amy to make the connection. Amy shook her head, trying to brush off the feeling that had settled over her. This is insane, she thought to herself. There was no way Winnie could have slashed her tires. But as she walked back into the house, the sense of dread only grew. She needed to do something about the cat. She needed help. She grabbed her phone and dialed Megan's number, hoping her friend could offer some advice, or at least a distraction. Megan answered on the second ring.
Hey, Amy. What's up?
Amy hesitated, unsure of how to start. Hey, Meg, I've got a bit of a situation.
Situation?
Megan's voice was laced with curiosity.
What kind of situation?
Well, I found a stray cat last night, Amy began, glancing over at Winnie, who hadn't moved from her spot by the door. Or maybe it found me. I brought her inside, but now, I don't know. She's been acting really weird. Like, I think she might be dangerous. Megan chuckled on the other end of the line.
Dangerous? Amy, it's a cat. What's she doing? Plotting your demise?
I'm serious, Meg, Amy insisted. She's been staring at me all morning like she's waiting for something. She almost made me fall down the stairs, and now my tires are slashed. I know it sounds crazy, but I don't think it's a coincidence. There was a brief pause before Megan responded, her tone more concerned.
Okay, that does sound a little freaky. But it's probably just bad luck, right? I mean, cats can be weird sometimes, especially if they're strays. Maybe she's just adjusting to being in a new place.
Maybe, Amy conceded, though the doubt in her voice was palpable. But it feels like more than that. I've never felt this uneasy around an animal before.
All right, how about this?
Megan suggested, her voice taking on a more practical tone.
I'll come by after work, and we'll take her to a shelter. They can check if she's microchipped, maybe find her owner. If she's causing you this much stress, it's probably best to get her out of your house.
Yeah, okay, Amy agreed, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. That sounds like a plan. I don't want to be alone with her anymore.
You're not alone, Amy.
Megan reassured her.
I'll be there this afternoon. I promise. We'll figure this out.
Thanks, Meg. I really appreciate it, Amy said, her voice softening. I'll see you later then.
Hang in there.
Megan replied before hanging up. Amy lowered the phone, her fingers still trembling slightly. The conversation had helped a little, but ultimately did nothing to quell her concerns. She turned to look at Winnie, who hadn't moved from her spot by the door. The cat's attention was still fixed on her. Amy forced herself to move. She decided to clean up the kitchen, trying to occupy her mind with something mundane, something that would distract her from the gnawing fear in the back of her mind. But as she went about her chores, she couldn't ignore the fact that Winnie was following her every move, her presence a constant, oppressive weight. Hours passed slowly, each minute dragging by as Amy waited for Megan to arrive. She couldn't relax, couldn't sit still. She wandered from room to room, always aware of the cat's eyes on her, the tension in the air thickening with every passing moment. Finally, when the clock struck 4, Amy's phone buzzed with a call. Relief flooded through her as she saw Megan's name on the screen. But the moment she answered, the respite proved short-lived.
Amy?
A frantic voice said, one she didn't recognize.
This is Megan's sister. There's been an accident. Megan, she's in the hospital. It's bad.
Amy's grip tightened on the phone, her knuckles white. What? What happened?
She was on the way to your house.
Megan's sister continued, her voice shaky.
There was a car accident. Paramedics said she was in critical condition. They've taken her to St. Mary's. I thought you should know.
Amy's breath caught in her throat. She felt the room spin around her, her vision blurring at the edges. Oh my God. I need to...
Amy, don't.
Megan's sister interrupted, her voice firm.
There's nothing you can do right now. The doctors are with her. Just pray, okay?
Amy nodded numbly, even though Megan's sister couldn't see her. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. She hung up the phone, her hand trembling as she set it down on the counter. Megan was on her way to help her, and now she was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. Amy's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, her back pressed against the cabinets. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly as she tried to process what she'd just heard. Megan had been coming to help her, to take Winnie away, and now... Amy's eyes darted to the cat. A nauseating fear overwhelmed her in that moment, wrapping itself around her heart and squeezing. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Megan was in that accident because of her, because of Winnie. The cat's eyes gleamed in the dim light, almost as if she were pleased. Amy squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the image, trying to convince herself she was being irrational. But the fear was too strong, too consuming. She had to get rid of the cat. She had to do it herself before anything else happened, before anyone else got hurt. Amy forced herself to stand, her legs weak. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of it made her stomach turn. She grabbed an old cardboard box from the laundry room, its sides flimsy and worn, and taped it shut as best she could. With quivering hands, she approached Winnie, who hadn't budged. "I'm sorry," Amy whispered, her voice barely audible, "but you can't stay here." She scooped Winnie up, the cat surprisingly compliant, and placed her in the box. As soon as the lid closed, however, the growling started, sinister and foreboding, vibrating through the cardboard. Amy swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she taped the box shut. She couldn't see the cat anymore, but she could hear her, the sound of claws scraping against the inside of the box, the growling growing louder, more frantic. She knew she couldn't drive with the slashed tires, so she would have to hike. The river wasn't far, just down the road and off the trail. She could make it. She had to. With the box in her arms, Amy stepped out into the chilly evening air. The weight of the box felt heavier with every step, the growling inside a constant reminder of what she was carrying and of the danger she was in. The box shifted in her grip, the tape barely holding as the cat thrashed inside. The trail to the river was narrow and winding, the trees closing in around her, casting long shadows into the fading light. Amy's heart pounded in her chest, each step a struggle as the dread clawed at her mind. She could feel the cardboard growing more unstable, tape straining, the sounds from inside becoming more desperate. The fear that the cat might escape before she reached the river was almost paralyzing, but she forced herself to keep going. Finally, she reached the riverbank. The water was murky and frigid, the current slow but steady, reflecting the last glimmers of daylight. Amy hesitated, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps as she considered her next steps. She had to do it. She had no choice. With a final labored breath, she pushed the container into the river. The package bobbed on the surface for a moment before slowly starting to sink. The growling inside faded as the water seeped in, and Amy watched, her heart in her throat, as the box disappeared into the depths. The last bubbles rose to the top, and then silence. Amy stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the spot where the box had sunk. Her mind was numb. It was over. It had to be over. Upon her return home, she stepped inside. The house felt emptier than before, the air heavy with the lingering fear. Amy grabbed the bottle of Cabernet from the kitchen and poured herself a glass, the wine a small comfort amidst the insanity she had just endured. She tried to convince herself that she was safe now, but as she sat down in the armchair, the glass in her hand, she couldn't help but feel that something was still wrong. Amy drained the glass and set it down on the coffee table. She forced herself to stand, to do something, anything to disrupt the uncomfortable silence. Over the next half hour, she collected whatever reminded her of Winnie, the food, the litter box, the water bowl, and disposed of it hastily, pouring everything into the trash just outside her front door. As she poured the last of the contents into the canister, the repercussions of what she had done became clear, weighing heavily on her in spite of the circumstances. Was that guilt she felt? Shame? Over Winnie? Over the cat that she was confident had tried to kill her and her loved ones, and would have done so if given the opportunity? She scoffed at the idea that she ought to feel anything other than relieved, and made her way to the bedroom. Lulled into a false sense of security, she wasn't prepared for what she heard next. A soft, continuous tapping coming from outside the front door. Amy's heart lurched in her chest. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, the fear she'd been trying to suppress surging back with the tapping. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to stay where she was, to not open the door. But the sound was insistent, rhythmic, as if something or someone was trying to get her attention. With trepidation, Amy walked to the door. She felt the cold seeping through the floor, chilling her feet as she approached. The tapping grew louder, more urgent, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She reached for the doorknob, her heart pounding. She twisted the knob slowly, unconsciously holding her breath all the while. The door creaked open. Outdoors, the air had grown icy, biting, and it carried the faint scent of wet earth and leaves. Her eyes moved downward, and her heart skipped a beat. There, on the porch, was the overturned garbage can, its contents strewn across the yard. The cat food she had thrown away earlier was scattered everywhere, and among the debris were wet paw prints, small, precise, leading away from the mess and right up to the threshold. Amy's stomach twisted in fear. She followed the trail with her eyes, her heart racing as they led from the porch, into the house, and down the hallway. The tracks were unmistakably fresh, the water still glistening on the floorboards. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Winnie was back. Amy's breath quickened, her mind racing. She closed the door slowly, trying to steady herself, trying to convince herself that this couldn't be happening. She had watched the box sink. She had seen the last of the cat. Winnie was dead. But as she followed the telltale trail through the house, her pulse quickened, her heart racing to such an extent she thought it might burst at any moment. The fear was paralyzing, gripping her so tightly that she struggled to think. She wanted to run, to get out of the house, but her feet wouldn't cooperate. The paw prints led to her bedroom, stopping just short of the doorway. The door was slightly ajar, and beyond she heard a bassy, guttural growl, a sound that sent a wave of terror crashing over her. Amy struggled to inhale as she reached for the door, pushing it open inch by inch. The room was pitch black, the shadows thick and impenetrable. Her eyes searched the gloom, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. And then she saw them. 2 luminescent spheres staring back at her. The eyes were filled with a malevolence that made her blood run cold. Winnie was there, sitting in the middle of the bed, soaking wet. Her fur was matted, water dripping from her body and soaking into the comforter. The cat's growls grew louder, more fervent as she locked eyes with the object of her ire. Amy froze, her mind screaming at her to do anything but stand there. But she found herself wholly incapacitated, unable to blink, let alone defend herself. She was trapped, paralyzed by fear as Winnie crouched low, preparing to strike. The last thing Amy saw was the flash of sharp teeth and the blaze of yellow eyes as Winnie lunged. Moments later, the house fell silent once more, save for the sound of the steady drip of water from soaked fur onto the vinyl floor of Amy's single-story ranch home. Down the street, a handful of neighbors, still awake, could have sworn they heard a scream. Just once, and just for a moment. They brushed it off, however, as most would, as either their imagination or the sounds of wildlife. Or perhaps some suspected they heard the sound of a cat lurking outdoors, celebrating a successful hunt.
I hope you enjoyed Winnie, as written by Groshek and performed by new Chilling Tales for Dark Nights voice actress Beth Gadow, Danielle Hewitt, and Heather Thomas. Our second tale of the evening is written by Dirk Stevens and performed by Olivia Steele, featuring myself, Paul J. McSorley, and Michelle Kane. After losing her husband to despair and her daughter to cancer, Sally encounters a shadowy creature feeding on her family's grief. Determined to stop it, she hunts the entity while grappling with her painful memories. Now, without further ado, I present to you this Devouring Darkness.
Dr. Alcott leans back in the lawn chair, folds his legs, and taps the back of his pen against his temple.
You're avoiding the question, Sally.
A blue finch lands on a branch over his head. Am I? It hops sideways, flaps its wings, and scolds another bird on the next branch up.
Yes, you are.
He reaches down into the messenger bag leaning against his chair.
I understand.
Pulling out a little pink notebook, he pushes his glasses a little higher up his nose.
You're still getting settled, and speaking face-to-face can be intimidating, even for some of our longtime residents. But unlike them, you chose to come here. This tells me 2 things. 1, you have a reason, and 2, you know what that reason is.
He holds out the notebook and pen and smiles.
Maybe once we know each other a little better, you'll feel like talking. But for now, write it down and any other thoughts or concerns you may have. And don't worry, I won't read it unless you want me to. It's not about that. It's only to give you an opportunity to gather your thoughts. Put them together in a constructive way. It's for your benefit, not mine.
I glance up at the tree, but the finch is gone. Very well. I sigh and take the notebook.
Wonderful.
Dr. Alcott rubs his palms together, gathers his bag, and pushes himself to his feet.
We'll talk again tomorrow. Good day, Sally.
He trods down the walk, around a few patients talking under a tree, and past an orderly pushing an old lady in a wheelchair. One hand stuffed in his pocket, his shoulders stooped, his steps plodding, tired, as if weighed down by some invisible load, battle-worn. I glance down at the floral pink book in my hands. Writing has never been my forte, but it's not much to ask. And so, opening the cover, I lay the book on my lap and write. To the diary, to Alcott, to whoever people who keep diaries write to. Dear Diary, hello. Sorry, I don't usually write like this. Truth be told, I don't even know where to start. It's Dr. Alcott's idea, not mine. He told me it would help make sense of what happened. Between you and me, I think he's hoping to get a peek. He said not, but I don't know. I know I haven't exactly been forthcoming, but if you are reading this, Doctor, it's nothing personal. You're great. I know it sounds crazy, and you wouldn't believe me if I told you. I haven't even been able to make sense of it. Not entirely. And I really don't want to sound like a lunatic. I don't know. Maybe I am crazy. You're the doctor. I guess you'll have to tell me. Dawn. Ona. It's about her, partly. A huge part, but it's complicated. I wish you could have seen her. The way her eyes sparkled when she laughed. Her dimples. She was my whole world. Kevin, my husband, and I struggled to have kids. It was my fault. I knew how bad he wanted a family, but we didn't have the money to pursue many options. He was great about it, though. He kept telling me that not all dreams end in gold, that I was really all he needed. But I could see the sadness in his eyes. The way that emptiness ate at him. And I hated myself, my body, for causing him that pain. So when I got pregnant, it was like God reached down and kissed me. We named her after the rising sun, and it fit. She was so beautiful, so happy, so curious. A little angel. 2 years later, Dawn and I were in the park blowing dandelions. She hadn't figured out how to blow, only put the fuzzy stem to her mouth and make a raspberry. So I had her wave them instead. I can still see her, the way she squatted down, her long dark hair dangling over her face when she bent over. Her chubby little fingers grabbed the stalk in a death grip. She stood up, rocked back on her heels, and turned around to show me, and kept turning. I thought it was a dance. I thought she wanted to spin the fuzz loose. Dance, dance, dance. I sang as she spun, dance, baby, dance. But then she stumbled. Her hair parted and I saw her face. The way the corner of her mouth drooped, how her right eye refused to open all the way, like her grandma's after her stroke. Ice stabbing at my chest, I snatched her from the ground, her head lulled to the side. Cancer. The doctor showed us the scan. the walnut-sized tumor near the base of her skull. The next months were some of the hardest of my life. The insurance didn't pay for nearly enough. I took on a second job, Kevin a third, but it didn't work. We didn't have family we could rely on. Cost made childcare out of the question, and driving to appointments, everything took up too much time. One of us needed to be there, but that meant less money. People who say money isn't important never had to live without. Rent became an ever-looming catastrophe. Gas, electric. I just started each day praying the car wouldn't break down. Dawn was the sun around which our world revolved. Everything else was expendable. And as the months crawled by, we fell into a strange sort of haze. Work, appointments, and household chores. I think it was that haze, more than anything else, that kept us going. That numbed us to the pain, or masked it. But we were still hurting. That's why it came. It. I know the name now, but I'm still not sure exactly what it is. It was after midnight, Halloween. I heard Kevin come in and got up to see if he needed anything. I peeked in to check on Dawn as I went by, which was a mistake. She woke up and it took half an hour to get her back to sleep. By the time I made it to the living room, Kevin was already asleep on the couch. I remember the smile, seeing him there brought to my lips. Touched he didn't want to wake me. I turned to go get him a blanket. I went to the closet, pulled down a quilt, and tiptoed back to the living room. And that's when I saw it. A towering black skeleton, cloaked in darkness and nearly transparent, like a dark mist, bent over Kevin's head. Like a vulture over roadkill. I jerked to a stop. Goose prickles exploded down my back and arms. And then it was gone. No smell, no cold chills or feeling of foreboding. Nothing like that. It was just gone. As if it had never been. At the time, I thought I was seeing things. Stress, worry, and exhaustion playing with my mind. I shook it off, tucked the quilt in around Kevin's neck, kissed his cheek, and went back to bed. A little off, but more thinking I needed sleep than anything else. By morning, it was all but forgotten. Kevin seemed tired, but fine, and the grind resumed. Weeks passed, chemo, surgery, more chemo, but day by day, Kevin's eyes lost their sparkle. We tried to keep in good spirits for Dawn, but he smiled less and less. Day by day, his shoulders hung a little lower. I thought he was just wearing down. So I tried to step it up. Be happier, more cutesy. Dawn and I made little cards and left them in the car for him to find. In his lunch, reminders of how much we loved him. It didn't help. Nothing helped. Not even when our second miracle came. The day the doctor came into the exam room beaming. The day she asked we both be there. The day she announced that the cancer was in remission. Kevin didn't even crack a smile. Barely looked up. He simply shrugged and grunted, "Remission isn't cured, it'll come back."
It can.
The doctor blinked. I think that was the moment I realized how far he'd fallen. When I saw the shock on her face. It was such a gradual thing, I didn't know how bad it had gotten. Not until she folded the file to her chest and said,
But it may not. Remission is the best possible outcome, Mr. Flores. You have a happy, healthy, beautiful little girl. Be grateful.
He didn't answer. Didn't speak the whole drive home. And when we arrived, he wasn't interested in our meager celebration, the pizza I ordered or the cake, only in laying down on the couch and falling asleep. He took his own life 3 years later. Another Halloween. But by then, he was already dead. Hollowed out by despair. More zombie than the man I knew. Dawn had started kindergarten. It wasn't all day every day, but enough I could work part-time. Minimum wage, but it gave us a little breathing room, at least financially. Our marriage was another matter. Kevin barely ate. Took to staring at the wall when he came home. Not even bothering to turn on the television. Not even bothering to sleep. No kisses, no conversation. He just stumbled through the door, flopped down on the couch, and stared at the wall until it was time to go to work again. After that day at the doctor's office, I tried to get him help many times. But he refused. When he answered at all, which wasn't often. I did my best to keep in good spirits. For Dawn. That Halloween, we decorated the apartment with paper bats and jack-o'-lanterns. Kevin's shift ended at midnight, so Dawn and I had our own party. She was too young to take trick-or-treating, but I dressed her up as a witch and had her help hand out candy to other kids when they came by. I put her to bed at 8, as always, and started folding laundry. Kevin never came home. But the police did, the next day, to inform me of his passing, to tell me he'd stepped out in front of a coal train. I asked some questions, but honestly, I don't remember much. Later, I learned that he'd been fired. One job a week ago, the other the day he took his life. But it wasn't the man I mourned at the funeral. It was my husband, Kevin, the man I loved. The years that followed weren't easy, but with Dawn in school, I was able to find better work, better pay, even benefits. We were able to move to a better apartment, and things started looking up. Until Dawn's cancer returned. She was 13. In my heart, she had always been perfect. A warrior. But in truth, her battle had left its scars. Some on the outside, one thin line across the base of her skull, another down the back of her head where the hair refused to grow, and some inside that couldn't be seen. Scars that halted her speech, hum when she got excited or nervous. Things that made her stand out. And children can be so cruel. They couldn't understand how brave she was, how strong. That those scars were her red badge of courage. I suppose it was that courage that caused her the most grief. She hid her pain, her loneliness, from the teachers, from me. Even at the checkup when the doctor told us there was a spot on the scan, she didn't show her fear. No, she tossed me one of her beaming smiles.
I guess...
She blinked, her mouth shaking as she fought to make the words come.
I get to kick its ass again. Huh.
Only her hum betrayed her. The same hum that ripped through my defenses like tissue paper. I couldn't answer. Could barely see her through the tears stinging my eyes. I knew she didn't have many friends, but I didn't realize she was an outcast. That she had no friends at all. Not for another few days. I knew what she was in for. I knew it would be worse for her now than it was then, because she'd know what was happening. And I didn't want her to face that alone. She was sitting on her bed reading when I entered her room. I sat down beside her. She closed her book, laid it down on the pillow, and folded her knees to her chest, waiting, peering at me from under her raven hair with those dark brown eyes. We had a couple days to plan, so, taking a deep breath, I asked if this Halloween she wanted to do something different, invite a few friends over and do something fun. She smiled, glanced down at the book she was reading, and pushed it towards me. I tipped my head to read the back cover. Silenced voices, beliefs, creatures, and stories of the Choctaw Nation. My mouth fell open. I stopped thinking about myself as Choctaw. Well, I never really did. You want to learn about your heritage? Why? Her lips pursed together as she reached for her notebook and began to write. A million questions jumbled together in my head as I watched the back of her pen dance. Questions that fell silent when she handed me her answers.
I don't have any friends. And I know this isn't going to be easy, but I need to know who I am and if I'm going to win this fight. Part of that means knowing where I came from. I need to find my true self. I don't want to be called Dawn anymore. Call me Onna. It means the same thing and it just fits better. Don't ask me to explain.
I remember staring at her note for a while, letting it all sink in. This was her fight. I would be there, help in any way I could. But ultimately, it was up to her. And if she didn't have anyone her age, no friend to stand with her, then I would be that friend. Okay, Ona. What do you want to do? She smiled and held out her hand, asking for the pad. I gave it to her, half skimming the back cover of her book, half watching her write until she handed it back.
We could go to the cultural center in Durand, see if they loan out books. You could make apple cider and we could spend Halloween studying.
I couldn't help but laugh. I asked if he wanted to do something fun. She shrugged and smiled, as if to say, studying is fun. I pulled her into a crushing hug, determined not to cry. Weirdo. I sniffed and kissed the top of her head. The next day, I called in sick, kept Ona home from school, and together we drove to Durant. I'm not sure what I expected, but it wasn't what I found. Oh, there was plenty of information, the history of my people, what life was like before the settlers arrived, and after. They had slides, interactive displays, and books by the gross, as if tailor-made for Ona. Complete with a giant turtle with reading nooks inside. She disappeared inside with a stack she could barely manage, but I think I learned even more. How many Choctaws assimilated, how they lost their roots, took on new names and traditions, and failed to pass their history on to their children. With Ona settled inside the turtle, I wandered, read the signs, and eventually struck up a conversation with the curator. She was a kind, open woman, and it wasn't long before I told her about Ona's struggles and our Halloween plans. She found a few well-used books they had planned on retiring, titles of others she knew that they had in the Tulsa library system, and gave me a list of websites to visit. We stayed for lunch and stopped for ice cream on the way home. The next day, Ona went back to school and I to work. I knew Ona wanted everything to be Choctaw, but Halloween is supposed to be spooky, so I decided to do both. I knew the library would be closed when I got off work. The Silenced Voices book Ona had been reading said creatures right on the cover, so I snagged it from her room on the way out. Later, in the parking lot outside the store, I sat in the car, thumbing through the book, searching for some spooky Choctaw creature I could make out of construction paper. The Wendigo seemed promising. I glanced at the illustration at the top of the page. Sort of a werewolf-looking thing. No, I shook my head. It just wasn't my kind of Halloweeny. Licking my finger, I reached for the upper corner of the picture, only to find it folded down toward the next page. I paused. It wasn't like Ona to deface a book like that. They were too precious for her. A flash of light caught my eye. I glanced up at a car turning into the space opposite me as I turned the page. My gaze dropped to the book, to a picture of a skeleton, cloaked in darkness, bent over a man on his knees, his face buried in his palms, weeping. My eye twitched. I'd seen it before, but I couldn't remember when or where. My gaze jumped to the description. The Impa Shalop, or Shadow Spirit, is one of the darkest creatures of Choctaw legend. Drawn to negative emotions, it enters its victim's mind and traps them in a cycle of despair, feeding on their souls until nothing remains. A vague memory pressed in on me. The monster from the book, a couch. Kevin. My God. My hands went numb. I glanced back at the picture. It was the shadow I saw all those years ago. A sort of skeletal darkness hunched over Kevin, as if the author had plucked the image from my memory. I read the description again. Traps them in a cycle of despair, feeding on their soul until nothing remains. My mouth went dry. That was almost exactly how I would have described what happened to Kevin. My gaze drifted to the folded corner. A thick mass settled in my stomach. I never told anyone about that night. I'd completely forgotten about it. There's no way Ona could have known. But she marked it. This page. This creature. Ona was in the kitchen when I got home, sitting at the table, hand shoved in a box of Frosty Flakes. She glanced up when I walked in, cheeks puffed out like a deranged chipmunk. My little Ona. I pushed the door closed with my foot, slumped over to the table, and dropped my bags in front of her. I had to beat an old lady with her own cane to get that. She snatched the nearest sack and peered inside. I smirked. It's all there, chips, avocados, onion dip, everything you wanted. She squinted over the side of the bag, her brow peaked in a question. Candy, like I could forget. Yes, I laughed. 3 bags of mini bars. She dove back into the bag, but I pulled it away. The other one. It never stood a chance. She ripped the sack open and flopped down in her chair, candy bag clutched tight against her chest. Grinning, I let her snack while I made the guacamole. Watched her cut white ghosts and orange jack-o'-lanterns out of construction paper while I talked about the center. How much I learned about my heritage, how I found some of the stories to be a little strange. Seemingly random musings, I hoped, led to a single question. Placing the guacamole on the table, I sat down and pulled her book from my purse. Like this one. I flipped to the page she marked, the Impa Shalop, and slid it over to her. Ona hummed. Her scissors clanked to the table.
You were...
She blinked, forcing the words to come.
in my stuff?
I licked my lips. This isn't what I wanted. Sweetie! She snorted and flopped back in her chair, betrayed, angry, and maybe she had a right to be. But I wasn't interested in a teenage turf war. Not with her. Not right now. I needed answers, and so, tapping on the picture, I cleared my throat. Ona, please. I need to know why you marked this page. Still humming, she folded her arms over her chest and retreated behind a curtain of hair. I know you're angry. That's fine. Hate me all you want. Without warning, my voice cracked. I need to know. Slowly, Ona's arms loosened. She tipped back her head, emerging from behind her hair.
Why?
Tears burned my eyes. Because... I managed, but my words wouldn't come. I covered my mouth with my hand.
You saw it too?
Ona's whole face twitched.
I thought you were sleeping.
A cold chill raced up my back, down my arms, and my fingers fell from my lips. What do you mean? Ona rolled her eyes, jumped up, and ran out of the kitchen. She returned a moment later, notepad in hand. She tossed it on the table in front of me and sat down.
The night the doctor told me my cancer was back, I got up to pee and heard you crying. I was gonna crawl in bed with you, let you know it was gonna be okay. But when I opened the door, there was this shadow thing by your bed. It saw me and sort of just vanished. I was gonna wake you up, but wasn't even sure it really happened. Then I had to write a report about Oklahoma history. I remembered you saying that we were Choctaw, so I started looking stuff up. That's when I saw that shadow thing. That's when I knew I hadn't just been seeing things.
My gaze jumped from her note to the book. That's why you got into... I swallowed hard. It was for me. To save me. Ona nodded, pulled the notebook over to her side of the table and wrote.
You didn't see it?
I shook my head. Not for many years. Ona stuffed the end of the pen between her teeth, gaze fixed on me. I cleared my throat. Not since you were a baby. Ona's eyes widened. Her pen almost slammed into her pad.
You mean Dad? It killed Dad?
I wiped my eyes and nodded. It was there and gone. I wasn't even sure I saw anything. If I'd known, maybe. I don't remember her getting up, or when she wrapped her arms around me. Only her warmth, her cheek on my ear, the feel of her in my arms, the sad little smirk she wore when we finally parted, and the message she wrote after.
Want to help me kill the son of a bitch?
Looking back, that Halloween was probably the most Halloween-y Halloween I ever had. We snacked all night, delved into all sorts of occult sites online, researched spells, rituals, mythologies, and beliefs of all kinds of different religions. Demonology, Jinn, Deva, nothing was out of bounds. In a way, it was almost therapeutic. We got so carried away chasing down leads, exploring new views, and learning about new entities, we forgot to be afraid. But the Impa Shalop was never far from our thoughts, ironically. It's ironic because the more we studied, the more we realized the similarities between the creatures we found. Regardless of culture or faith, there were differences, of course, but minor, as if they were nothing more than different accounts about the same entities. In the case of the Impa Shalop, a spirit, a being living in two dimensions that occupy the same physical space, a parasite that seeks out the vulnerable. Once infected, once it enters its victim, being spirit, it joins with them in a way. The way alcoholism consumes a man, another similar creature, as I learned. A cousin, impossible to kill or drive out, but with constant vigilance, possible to hold at bay. Fight a lifelong stalemate. You know what I'm talking about, Doctor. You've battled the same demon longer than I have. Though you call it by another name. Claim it has no will of its own, no substance, merely a malfunction of the brain, a chemical imbalance. But I've read enough lore to see the common thread. It's the same creature, merely described differently by another system of belief. That of null, atheism, the religion of logic and the five senses. Regardless of what you call it, it's the same dark shadow that came for me when Ona passed into the spirit realm 2 years later. As I sat not quite alone in our empty apartment. But unlike Kevin, unlike so many of its victims, I watched it come. Stood vigil as the shadows folded in on themselves, stared into the eternal void contained within its lidless eye sockets as it placed its ethereal claws on my head and entered my thoughts. Unlike them, I welcomed it. And there it remains, imprisoned. It, and many like it, unable to harm another. You see, Doctor, I am not the woman I was. I am aware of the world that lies beyond our sight. It was Ona who taught me that darkness always flees the light. It was her who gave me the cords to bind it, the memories, her smile, her eyes, her courageous love, and the bait to lure them into my trap. The pain of her absence, her lingering death. That is why I came, Doctor. Not for aid, but to help. I suppose, in the simplest terms, you could say I'm hunting. I lift my pen from the paper and smile. Well, what do you know? I never really thought of it in those terms before. It seems Dr. Alcott is better than I thought. A slight movement pulls my attention to the old woman in the wheelchair, or rather, to a dark patch under the shrub beside her. Sighing, I rip the letter from the notebook, crumple it into a ball, and force myself to recall Ona's last days. The pain etched across her face, her moans. Once again, I relive the agony. Draw another monster into its prison of light, devouring the darkness. For Ona. For Kevin. For the old woman. For me.
I hope you enjoyed this Devouring Darkness, as written by Dirk Stevens and performed by Olivia Steele, featuring myself and Michelle Kane. Also, don't forget, we have our own book out. Since 2012, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights has been keeping people awake through the night with terrifying audio renditions of tales from the darkest minds modern memory has to offer. Now, in this first of 3 volumes, collected are 30 tales, never before available by some of the most prolific and talented authors of the online community, each one accompanied by a suitably grim illustration by David Romero. Strange cats, body mutilations, demonic apartments, revenge from beyond the grave, and yes, even a man-eating monster or two. All of these and more beckon you further into the darkness. Turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Who needs sleep anyway? Check it out at Amazon today or by going to chillingbook.com. On to the shows. Longtime resident Otis Gyrie has his very own show here on our network, Scary Stories Told in the Dark, which you can hear every Sunday night. We also have Eric Peabody's Horror Hill, a podcast dedicated to some of our deeper and darker tales. We hope you check him out. And Drew Blood's Dark Tales airs Fridays, featuring some southern down-home horror. And don't forget to check out the Fear from the Heartland archives, featuring more than 120 episodes. Well, friends, our weekly descent into the depths has just about come to a close. But before we go, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us tonight, and remind you to take a moment to stop by our iTunes page and leave Chilling Tales for Dark Nights a 5-star review and a kind word. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram if you haven't already. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube, where you can find an archive of our work going back to 2012. And consider signing up as a patron at our website, chillingtalesfordarknights.com, to show your support and get all of our content ad-free. I'm your host of the evening, Paul J. McSorley, and it's been a pleasure. Tune in again next week when we once again turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Sweet dreams, listener. Sweet dreams.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.